Hi, my name is Rafael Pedemonte. I am a Chilean researcher and since last year a professor of Hispanic Studies in the Department of Applied Linguistics at the University of Antwerp. And to be honest, I don't like football at all. But having studied cultural diplomacy during the Cold War, I must admit that sport played a key role in the cultural Cold War, particularly in Latin America. When Chileans think about the 1962 World Cup in Chile, they usually remember Chile's remarkable third place and the infamous Battle of Santiago between Chile and Italy, considered by one commentator as the most stupid, appalling, disgusting, and disgraceful exhibition of football in the history of the game. But the tournament was also something more. It offered a fascinating window into the Cold War as it unfolded in Latin America at a particularly important historical moment. Just 3 years earlier, in 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution had shaken Cuba, eventually declaring the socialist nature of his country in April 1961 and dramatically transforming the regional political landscape. As a result, the Soviet Union saw a real opportunity to expand its influence in Latin America, while the United States became increasingly concerned about revolutionary movements spreading throughout the region. It is against this backdrop that Chile became an unexpected stage not only for football competition, but also for a contest between the two superpowers. As for Chileans themselves, hosting the World Cup was a source of enormous pride. This was a country often described as el fin del mundo, the end of the world, an isolated nation at the southern tip of the Americas. Yet for 1 month in 1962, Chile became not the end of the world, but the heart of the world. This achievement was all the more remarkable because Chile had won the right to host the tournament against neighboring Argentina. How did it happen? During FIFA's 1956 Congress, Chilean Football Federation President Carlos Didborn delivered what would become one of the most famous phrases in the history of Chilean football, or the most famous phrase in the history of Chilean football. Responding to arguments that Chile lacked the necessary infrastructure, he declared, "Porque no tenemos nada, queremos hacerlo todo. Because we have nothing, we want to do everything." The sentence was an explicit reaction to the argument put forward by the Argentinian representative before FIFA. "We can have the World Cup. Tomorrow," they said. "We have it all." Yet, Chile's selection as host was also a reflection of the country's reputation for political stability. Since the early 30s, Chile had maintained one of the most durable democratic systems in Latin America. Its representatives emphasized that the country's tradition for political tolerance, particularly toward left-wing parties and labor unions, a claim intended to appeal to the Eastern socialist countries and the Soviet Union in particular. This stability contrasted with Argentinians' tumultuous political situation, where the 1955 coup d'etat led to political unrest, violence, and numerous deaths. Overall, for Soviet post-Stalin international strategists, Chile appeared also politically as an increasingly attractive land. Unlike many other South American countries, Chile seemed to offer the possibility that the left could attain power through elections, rather than through armed revolutions. Socialist leader Salvador Allende had already run for president twice, and the Chilean Communist Party, following Moscow's strategic line, advocated a peaceful and electoral road to socialism. For the American policymakers, this was a concern for sure. The United States was not participating in the World Cup itself. Nevertheless, Washington followed developments in Chile very closely. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy had recently launched the Alliance for Progress, an ambitious program of economic aid and development intended to encourage reform in Latin America while reducing the appeal of revolutionary movements inspired by Cuba. Chile was one of the main recipients of this aid. The World Cup provided a perfect opportunity to showcase both superpowers' influence through cultural diplomacy. The Soviet Union arrived in Chile with more than just a football team. Accompanying the delegation, the football delegation, was the famous Berioska Ballet, a large ensemble renowned for its elegant costumes and seemingly magical dances. The Chilean audiences were captivated. Performances attracted significant attention and contributed to a positive image of the Soviet culture in the country. Such was the popularity of the Berioska Ballet that the ballet returned to Chile a couple of years later. American diplomats watched these developments with concern. The US ambassador in Santiago worried about the popularity of the Soviet presence and urged Washington to respond. The White House answers with one of America's most celebrated cultural ambassadors, the jazz legend Louis Armstrong. He was an important symbol of American cultural diplomacy, traveling extensively on behalf of the United States and its model, including a tour in Congo. On June the 1st, 1962, 2 days after the opening match of the World Cup, Armstrong arrived in Chile. In a carefully staged gesture, he appeared dressed as a Chilean huaso, the iconic horseman associated with Chilean rural traditions. The problem was that football dominated the public attention. Armstrong's first performance coincided with the match between Chile and Italy, and unsurprisingly, the concert attracted relatively little interest. Armstrong and his musicians then traveled to the port of Valparaiso. Given the city's reputation as a center of nightlife and bohemian culture, organizers expected a larger audience. Yet once again, many seats remain empty. Today, Armstrong's visit is largely forgotten in Chilean collective memory. The Soviet cultural offensive, by contrast, left a much stronger impression. The Soviet team included one of the greatest goalkeepers in history, Lev Yashin, known internationally as the Black Spider because of his extraordinary reach. Yashin was already, in Chile, a global star. Chilean fans were fascinated by him, including, for instance, my dad, whose first experience with football was precisely that World Cup, and who went on to become a professional goalkeeper for a short period of time. Yashin became a mythological figure for many Chileans. The Soviet government understood the value of his popularity. In 1964, when Moscow established diplomatic relations with Chile, Yashin was chosen to serve as president of a Soviet-Chilean Friendship Association. Soviet officials recognized that his name immediately resonated with Chilean audiences. In a previous work, I have argued that the Soviet cultural presence in Chile during the 60s contributed to mitigating the historically negative image that the communist superpower had in Chile. And I think that the example of the 1962 World Cup confirms this hypothesis on the role of cultural diplomacy. During the years that followed, Soviet cultural influence expanded significantly. Prominent visitors included cosmonauts Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, and Alexei Leonov, the first human to perform a spacewalk. Soviet cultural institutions such as the Bolshoi Ballet, the Moscow Circus, and the Red Army Choir attracted large audiences throughout the country. The cultural presence reached its peak after 1970, when Salvador Allende and his Popular Unity Coalition came to power by electoral means. Relations between Santiago and Moscow deepened considerably. Allende himself once referred to the Soviet Union as Chile's older brother. For a brief period, Chile became one of the Soviet Union's most important partners in Latin America. But this chapter came to an abrupt end. On September 11, 1973, General Augusto Pinochet led a military coup d'etat that overthrew Allende's government. Diplomatic and cultural relations with the Soviet Union were immediately interrupted, and a new era began. Looking back, the 1962 World Cup reveals something important about the Cold War. The struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union was not fought only through military alliances, economic aid, or political ideology. It was also fought through culture, music, art, and of course, sports. In Chile, football became a stage for global competition.
Universiteit Antwerpen. Bepaal mee de toekomst.